it's me, Ashley. I know you may have forgotten who I am because I haven't been on the Marketing for Learning podcast in a couple of weeks. But hey, I'm back and welcome back to the Marketing for Learning podcast. I am still very much on maternity leave and taking care of a 6-week-old beautiful baby girl, but I miss being on this podcast and very much wanted to come and, weigh in on something that I thought might be kind of interesting for you guys today. Definitely more of a marketing focused session today, maybe introducing you guys to some new terminology and maybe some new technology that you have heard of, I expect, but maybe aren't using. So what I want to explore with you in this podcast is bounce rate and how we can use bounce rate to better understand our audience's behavior, but also help you better embrace the usage of Google Analytics. And I am going to do a subsequent episode on Google Analytics as well. So if that's something that you're starting to explore, hopefully this will be an interesting introduction for you. So today we're going to talk about bounce rate, what it is, why it matters, and ultimately why you should start to consider using this metric within your organization. So bounce rate is something that marketers use a lot. Typically, you would get this sort of information from using Google Analytics. If you're not familiar with what Google Analytics is, essentially it is an analytics layer that is embedded onto your website and monitors audience behavior on a per page basis. It has changed significantly in recent years, and so now we don't get half as much data as we used to due to cookie laws and the such like, but it still does give some good information in terms of what audiences are doing, where they're going, where you're losing them, and so on and so forth. And bounce rate is one of the best metrics, one of the most simple metrics I think that marketers can use to really help them understand if what they have built is working for their audiences. So let's get into it. Bounce rate essentially is the percentage of visitors that visit a specific page on your website. So in your case, it's probably likely to be more like your intranet pages, your SharePoint pages, your learning platform in particular, who navigate away from that page without taking any further action. So they land on a URL of some kind, they're on that URL for however long, and then they come back off that URL. They don't navigate more deeply into the website or your learning platform. They'd use that page and they go off. So the reason a bounce rate is really important to monitor is it can give you an indication into the health of your learning platform. So most likely you're going to use this on your learning platform. As I said, there may be some other instances where you may use it, but let's look at it through the lens of your learning platform and how this might give you some insights into the performance of your LMS or learning platform. So let's start with why bounce rate's important. So it can tell you a lot about your audience's attitudes towards your learning, but also give you a good indication as to, like I said before, whether it's actually working for your audience, whether they're actually getting what they want or what they're expecting. So the kind of key two reasons that we'd use bounce rate, or why we should kind of value it, is if someone's bouncing back off your LMS, so they come to that page and then they go, it means that they're not necessarily maybe learning more than that. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, because it may be that you're positioning things really well. They're going, and if the page dwell time is quite high for the pages that are bouncing, then that might mean that people are actually still undertaking the learning on those pages, but they're not going any further. They're not perusing the LMS. They're not digging deeper into the LMS. In which case, even though you have a high bounce rate, people are spending the time on the pages, they're undertaking the learning, and therefore a high bounce rate wouldn't be a concern. However, if you have a high bounce rate and people are bouncing straight off the pages, it may well be that people aren't getting what they wanted or expected from your comms and what led them to land there. And therefore, then bounce rate needs to be concerning you, shall we say. Because a high bounce rate essentially lets you know that your LMS or specific pages or courses modules on your LMS has issues. Whether that's issues with the learning content itself, the user experience, the page layout and navigability, even the copywriting, all kind of marketing components that we've talked about in other aspects of the podcast. It can give you a bit of a temperature check quite quickly as to whether this page and a wider lens of the overall site, in inverted commas, or your LMS is working. So that's why how we want to be using bounce rate. So a high bounce rate in and of itself doesn't indicate a concern, but it does need some context around it. Generally speaking, in marketing land for websites, you're looking at a bounce rate of average around like 40 to 50%. But of course, I have no idea what your bounce rate is for your learning platform. So you'll have to start capturing that data in order to actually get a view of what your average is and whether you want to impact that positively or negatively once you have some data. A point to note, of course, is if you are planning on monitoring bounce rate, then I'd highly recommend, even if you don't have the capacity to do it right now, you don't have the capability or a team resource or knowledge and skills to be able to actually leverage Google Analytics, still get it downloaded onto your system, get your IT department to do it, fight the fight to get it on, because in my experience, it should be really easy to put in, but I've found that a lot of IT departments actually are quite difficult when trying to get this on the learning platforms. The thing with Google Analytics is it only works from the day it's installed on your site, so you can't like retrospect any data, you can't get anything. So it's only once the tracking code is installed that you'll start to get data. So the sooner you can get that implemented, even if you don't know that you're going to be using Google Analytics in the next 6 months or even a year, try and get it on your system, on your platform, so that you actually can use the data when you're ready. So, why might people bounce off your learning platform? There's some very clear reasons, and some of them I kind of touched on very lightly, but probably the biggest one is going to be that the page that people have landed on has not met their expectations. So it may be the case that you've overpromised something, you've missold something, they're expecting this amazing, phenomenal experience, and it's really outdated, it's difficult to navigate. Ultimately, you need to make sure that your marketing messaging and the communications that you're building to promote people's action, and i.e. getting them to your learning platform and your learning content, is directly aligned with the experience that they're going to have on the platform. So you need to make sure that those two things are lined up, which is why I always say marketing should come last, and after you've done your alignment with the business, you've done your learning strategy, you've refreshed your tech or done a cull of the learning content that you've got, and you're really happy with your learning product first. Because if you're going to do marketing and your learning product isn't up to scratch, then you may as well not do marketing, because people are just going to become very quickly disenchanted with what it is that you're selling them, in inverted commas, and then they're just going to bounce straight away. Saw that, I'm not going to do that. Absolutely not. So you need to focus on making sure your product is fit for purpose and appropriate and meeting expectations, and then that the communications that you use once that's in place is actually an extension of that, and a consistent message and experience throughout the entire learning proposition. Another aspect of that, of course, is if the experience is clunky, if it's outdated, if the design is ugly or very poorly visually. Again, it doesn't take a lot for people to get a bad first impression. This, on websites, I think there's a margin of about 2 seconds that people have a first impression of a website, and they'll bounce if they think that if it takes too long to load. People will literally just not even wait for the website to load if it takes too long. So again, is your learning platform taking a long time? What's that experience like? Again, that could be a good indication of a poor learning experience. So again, this is why bounce rate is so useful for us. And of course, the converse of that is, again, that high bounce rate not necessarily being a bad thing, that people are actually getting what they want from that experience, and therefore they're staying on the page for a long time because they're learning. You've given them exactly what they've wanted. But as I said, the only way to really truly understand that is, again, having Google Analytics so that you can see how long people are averagely staying on a specific page as well. So let's look at what you need to do in order to get Google Analytics on your LMS. So as I've alluded to, I'm not sure why, but there does seem to be some internal resistance a lot of the time in terms of getting Google Analytics installed as a layer over your learning system. But ultimately, I would strongly suggest that you pitch this in and why you need it, because it doesn't just give you insight into bounce rate. It gives you insight into geographical regions of people. It gives you insights into what devices people are accessing your website, i.e. your platform, on. It tells you how long people are spending on the LMS. It'll tell you, how quickly they're coming and going, what pages are popular. Again, if you can identify pages that have a high bounce rate, you can then discern, okay, is this page performing really well? People are getting what they want. The learning's working really well, i.e. are they staying for a long time? Or does that high bounce rate indicate actually that we have a bit of an issue? People are getting lost. People are getting stuck. The user experience isn't aligned for whatever reason. So getting Google Analytics is crucial, and it's really easy to set up an account. You can go and do it yourself, and then all you basically need to do is copy and paste some text that you need to send to your IT administrator, and essentially it just goes into the head code of your learning management system. Even your vendors may be able to help, but I expect if you're doing administration and hosting yourself, then your IT function will definitely need to do it. But I highly recommend getting this installed as soon as possible, because I'm going to do a separate session on some of the other facets of Google Analytics and how we can use Google Analytics to improve our user experiences. Because when we think of marketing for learning, we think of marketing mindset, we think of, great campaigns and, really pretty brands. But actually, this is the nitty gritty stuff, the data side of things that really deviate good marketers as well. A fastidious commitment to truly understanding our audience and what they are doing, so that we can then constantly pivot, iterate, move, and adjust ourselves accordingly. So bounce rate, gives you some good idea of what in the heckiddy heck people are doing on your learning platforms. And I strongly recommend that you start to consider this data point. If you're using Google Analytics already, are you using bounce rate? If no, why not? It isn't just to see how many site visitors you're getting on a monthly basis and how many of them are repeat visitors. And again, I'll go into this in the separate episode. But, bounce rate, in my opinion, is one of the most important data points that we could leverage as marketers to very simply understand the sentiment of our audiences through their behavior. So that's my brain thoughts. 6 months postpartum, 6 weeks, good Lord. I'm amazed that I managed to string a coherent sentence together with baby brain and sleep deprivation. But thanks for hanging out with me, guys. I probably won't be on here as frequently as Han is, just because she's holding the fort like a little champion. But I'm around, I'm lurking, and I'll certainly be back with another podcast soon. So thanks for tuning in, guys. This is the Marketing for Learning podcast, and I love you. Marketing for Learning is a thing.